So, once upon a time ago when I had just turned 18, I decided that I wanted to try out exotic dancing. All I had to do to get started was get a pair of heels. The only place to get heels was 2 hours away by car. Me and my friend, who was 17 at the time, drove the 2 hours to get them. We went to 5 different stores and couldn't find the ones that I wanted. So we decided to stop at Wingstop to get dinner, then go back to the first store that we stopped at and get the heels that they had there. We walked into the Wingstop and this dude at the front counter started telling us his life story, not leaving anything out, which was a little off-putting. Then he asked where we were from and we told him the county instead of telling him the exact town. He then proceeded to ask why we were so far away from where we lived, and my friend answered with, "Well, she's a dancer and she's looking for heels," to which I elbowed her for exposing me. The dude proceeded to give us our food for free and called his mom to see if she had any heels. He asked if we wanted to ride with him and we both said no, but he insisted. And I had just smoked some Zaza with my friend before going into Wingstop, so I wasn't really thinking. I thought my friend was coming with us, but we pulled out of the parking lot without her, which petrified me, especially when I realized that I left my phone in my friend's car. I sat in that car as far away from him as I could, and he pulled into an apartment complex and went inside. He came back out 30 minutes later with a box of shoes. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if he could hire me for private dances. He asked what club I was going to work at, and I lied and told him the wrong club. When we got back to my friend's car, he asked for my number. I was going to give him the wrong number, but he said that he was going to call it to make sure that it was the right number. I gave him my number. And then he got in the back seat of my friend's car and tried to smoke Zaza with us. He had his own, but I wasn't about to smoke somebody else's when he was being that sketchy. So I texted my cousin and told him to call me and tell me that my grandma was dying in the hospital. I know I'm not proud. And dude got out of the car and went back to work, and my friend pulled out of the parking lot and parked somewhere else so that we could eat our food. Also, on our way home that night, we almost got into a head-on collision, but we survived. When I was younger, I met a man. He was my brother's friend, and he had started living with us after his parents had done some despicable things, and he was left practically alone and a minor still attending school. Though I can't remember if he was emancipated or supposed to be under someone else's care. I was an annoying little sister then, 7 years younger, but I remembered him saying to my brother, "I don't mind at all, she reminds me of mine." What really gets me about this story, this experience, was that I somehow didn't realize until about a month ago how important these events to transpire just might be. For me, those only 2 events that are unmistakably him, things that he did to me. The first being one night when I was coming down for a glass of water. I began by opening my heavy bedroom door, and I continued down the creaky hallway and the stairs without at all being silent. Just as I had gotten to the bottom platform, I saw him sitting at the computer. I looked at him and he looked at me. I heard an old news report playing of the arrest of his parents. I felt like I was invading his most private moment, a time where he was obviously emotional and raw, and I felt horrible. I paused in that moment because it was such an awkward situation. I just wasn't sure how I was supposed to respond next. But in that moment where I was in my own head, he must have closed the tab and reopened another. He had to have hit play as I imagined and wouldn't have started on its own. And I heard moaning. He just stared at me, and I'm now even deeper in my own head like, is this happening? It must have been an accident. And I finally got the sense in me to go back to my room. I can't remember if I ever told anyone that at the time. I dismissed it as an accident. The second one happened just as I had got out of school. I went up to my room to find my bubble-back TV was missing. My brother took it all the time either as his own perceived punishment or because he wanted to use it for whatever reason. So I started by storming into his room and demanding where it was. The prong in my screw-on cable cord was getting bad and it was such a hassle to set up again and again, I was aggravated. He tells me that he has no idea and that he couldn't care less. So confused, I'm now wondering who else would take it. I'm not grounded and my brother doesn't have it. Could it be his friend? I go to his room and I knock. He sounds upset and I ask if he took it. Through the door, he said that he did. And going back to my aggravated state, I open it up to see it sitting on the ground, seemingly unused. I then angrily say, "Why did you take my TV?" And before I know it, he's bum rushing me into a wall and he lifts me higher up by the throat. I start yelling at him, yelling in general, trying to fight back, and my mom runs up the stairs and she screams at him. She tells him to let go of me and to get the heck out. As my brother comes out of his room with the most puzzled look on his face like, "What are you doing?" His friend then leaves and I can't remember him coming back and living with us after that. A while later, my brother moved to a new house in the same neighborhood, and for years, he would on and off allow that friend to stay with him. He felt bad for him, thought that he was given an unfair start in life and he wanted to help him. It was before or around this time that a man in all black would begin terrorizing me. I've written a story about that on here before, so you might possibly recognize it. But it all started on Hallows Eve when I was in 5th grade. It's exhausting to go through all of this again, truthfully. It was something that apparently my mind tried to downplay, dismiss, and forget for a while. But recently in therapy, I was forced to really face it, to realize it was the origin of who I am today. So, I'm going to try to briefly explain what happened, without leaving too many details out. There was a knock on the door while I was home alone. It was the middle of the night and I grew up watching Forensic Files, Law & Order, SVU, etc. So I was just naturally like, yeah, I don't want to open this. But like all the dumb characters in horror movies who die in the beginning, I did. I opened the door and no one was there, so I stepped out onto the porch to look and see if they were leaving, because of the moment I had taken to decide, but there was no one there. At first, I thought nothing of it, one of my brother's friends or something. But sometime later, I was sitting on the couch and from there, I saw something dark flash past the kitchen window. It was quick, but I kept thinking, probably just my brother or his friends are playing a prank and maybe it's just nothing. I had no idea, but I was definitely creeped out. As I sat there, I just had this feeling of being watched, like my senses were telling me something was off. But that didn't prepare me for when I looked up, and amidst the slight glow of the backyard, I saw the outline of a man in black standing in the window. In the case of fight or flight, freeze or fawn, I froze. And that was when I watched as he lightly knocked on the window and did a closed finger wave like you would to a child. And then he just disappears. And to summarize what happened when my family came home, it wasn't my brother, and they were more than convinced that it was a prank. There are more details surrounding these more important events and what had transpired between them and my previously written story. But what matters is that it never really stopped after that. Any time that I was home alone or it was late at night, he was there, dressed entirely head to toe in black, so I've never been so sure of his age, race, and nothing. There were phone calls that started at some point, but they would only be silence or a quick breath. And even though I lived in a house of people, it seemed that it only happened to me. My mom had picked up these silent phone calls, but there she would hang up quickly, and she assumed nothing of it. And then the next real event happened. I was again home alone. It was a Friday, I remember, because my friends were at a school football game that I didn't have a ride for. Around that time, things had kind of slowed down with the man. It seemed like he was coming around and just staring at my house from the backyard far less often. So I was actually feeling pretty relaxed at the time, considering everything. I was watching the TV show House, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark, sudden flash. My stomach dropped. My heart was pounding like a drum. Everything went quiet. I had muted the TV, and it was almost like a who blinks first scenario, because whoever or whatever it was making no noise. An eternity had passed in a series of seconds to minutes, until reality came back with the sound of a doorknob. I heard it jiggling. From deafening silence to hearing the unexpected sound of the figurative pin dropping, my stress response chose correctly for the first time, and I ran. I grabbed my phone, left everything else, and went right out of the door. I didn't stop until I reached the other side of town. There, I remember laying underneath the streetlight, thinking that this was it, the day it was all building up to. I had been sleeping with a knife under my pillow, being unbelieved for years at this point, and it all led to this. It was either an attempt or he wasn't done with me yet. He could be coming at any moment, or his very next opportunity. I took those seconds to try to gather my thoughts, catch my breath, and then I called my mom. She was out at the bar with her boyfriend at the time, so they picked me up and we all went back home. Her boyfriend made us stay in the car, and the only thing different than how we had left it was the back door being wide open. It was a complicated antique door and not easily opened even when it was unlocked. So that should have been a huge worry in and of itself, but of course, they dismissed that too. They said that it must have been the cat. Seriously, the most concerning thing for me, though, was that nothing was taken. Most people would naturally first assume it must have been a burglar, but no, nothing was taken. And at the time, there was just a basement full of expensive tools and equipment, as my mom and her boyfriend were flipping houses. And yet not a single thing was gone. There was more than enough time too. From my leaving the house to coming back had to be about 30 minutes or so. Sometime after that event, my neighbor then experienced something too. While sitting on his patio with his girlfriend, a man in all black started approaching them from the yard of an abandoned home. My neighbor told him to stop, and he didn't. And then he pulled out his gun, said to stop, and he didn't. So my neighbor then fired at the ground, and in that moment, he must have decided that it wasn't worth it because he ran off, tripping over a branch on his way out. That was around the same time that he stopped coming around. But now, as I previously mentioned, therapy has forced me to face this and try to process it. During the time of these events, naturally, I spent so much time wondering who it could be and why. What, to kidnap me, to kill me, to do something unspeakable. But I never got any answers from the world, time, or myself. Until possibly now. My brother's friend. After all these events that had transpired, and while sleeping in my brother's car, he did something horrifying. He set himself up along a levee. At first, just himself and a notebook, and he would watch people as they walked by. They went along with their day unsuspecting, as he would make a record of everyone that he saw. Hair color, what they were wearing, race, gender, age, range, how long they were there, how often, with someone, or were they alone. And then one day, with a knife in hand, he pulled a woman off the levee and into a nearby wooded area. She was able to fight him off, and she got away, but not unscathed. He had slashed her arm, and I can't even imagine the horror she went through in those moments. Following that, I'm not sure how they found him, or how they knew about the notebook, but the only address they had from him was my brother's and ours. State and local police, as well as, I believe, possibly a U.S. Marshal. It was a branch of law enforcement I remember being high up and unusual. They came to my door in a sudden swarm. They had banged at my door as I had opened. A cop slammed me against the door with his forearm and told me to stay back. I was absolutely clueless to what was happening, but it started to click when my brother's friend was being walked out in handcuffs from my brother's home. They sat him upon the stairs, feet away from police canines, and I could hear them asking where his backpack is. A man said, "If you don't tell us where it is, we're going to search both of these houses." I think that he sincerely cared about my brother, as my brother did for him for all those years, and so I assume that's why he then divulged that it was under the dining room table at my brother's home. They then went, collected it, and simply left. I don't know what happened to him, but now years later I wonder if everything that happened to me was because of him. The way that he wrote down those people's every movement terrifies me, yet almost solidifies in a way my suspicion. What if the only reason he knew when I was truly home alone, our routines, was because he has a notebook on me too? Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty or classically pretty either. I'm the Duffy in any friend group that I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I'm just so plain, and it's always me that has to be the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there, I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off of work and I was chilling at my usual spot and sipping on my drink while working on a new pendant that I was making. I had started wire wrapping crystals into jewelry. I didn't think anybody would try to talk to me since I knew I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me a slight attention and they're nice to me. But this weird guy that I had never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and I looked up at him and struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how I started, but he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal and all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. Again, I'm plain and I didn't think anyone would want to do anything to me. I had drank 3 glasses of soda by then and I had used the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and my purse and I went to the bathroom. I may not have been worried about getting taken, but I did worry about my identity, cash, and my contacts. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working, since none of my stuff had been touched. I called a waitress over and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded as it had always been ingrained in me that you never leave your drink unattended to, and if you do, have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying that I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why. Was it his business if I did? It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said that I was making it more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I told him again that it was my business and that if he didn't like it, then he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off without letting her change my drink, but I had had enough of his nonsense and I told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked and then a bit angry before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy that I was talking to, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and just bring me water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after, and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out until today what exactly had happened. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he had stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and it started a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently he is trying to see if he could get someone like me who always had her guard down for herself because my confidence was low. He thought that I would be an easy mark with just a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, He had to try it on another girl. If he really was targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness for those old lessons about safety growing up. Thanks, Mom and Dad.